If you're a pastor in another department on staff, like come alongside your next gen team and like, hey, how can I help you?
I think when they can see that there is a relationship with God outside of that specific level, then they begin to see what the relationship with God looks like for the rest of their life.
And so that is one thing I love about all these generations, is that they're all working together. Hey ministry friends, welcome back to Learn Together. My name is Saehee Duran. I'm your host, and I'm here with Anna, my co-host. Hey Anna, how are you?
I'm doing so well, Saehee. How are you doing today?
Very good. I don't know if you can believe this already. We only have like 2 podcasts left for the season. So
I literally cannot believe it. I was looking at the calendar this morning. I'm like, how is it already the end of 2022? I keep on calling it 2021. That's how far behind I am.
I know. Some of us are still stuck in 2020, like right pre-COVID.
For
But
real.
as
For
we are
real.
journeying through this season, already end of the year almost, but then our task remains the same, which is making disciples of all nations and generations, which we forget the latter part sometimes. Like I think as ministers in various contexts and seasons of life, we sometimes like to silo our ministry and compartmentalize, where, okay, this is my title, so to speak. Okay, I'm a children's pastor, youth pastor, or I'm a senior pastor, lead pastor. And then you kind of like try to compartmentalize your ministerial role and forget the fact that we all are, like all believers, the saints of Jesus Christ, are called to make disciples of all nations and generations. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I served in youth ministry for a long time. Like I started serving in a high capacity youth ministry from the time I was 16, 17 years old. And then through college, I was on staff serving in youth ministry. And then after college, and then I made a transition into an associate pastor role. And it's so interesting how easily I have felt even like out of touch in some ways with youth ministry, because we do kind of say like, oh, that's kids, or that's next gen, or that's youth. And that's not my thing. And so it's been kind of one of those things in this season, especially now that I'm a mom, that I'm like, the next gen matters to me more than ever before, which I didn't even know that was possible, but it does. And yet here I am, because of kind of the way that we can view ministries, I feel a little out of touch.
That's true. One of the pastors that made the most impact on my life when I was just learning by observing was one pastor who kind of at the end of the service and before service greeted people, and then he got down to his knee to see a little child, probably like 2-year-old, eye to eye, and he was ministering to that little child. And it was a senior pastor, right? It's very easy to just bypass these little children who are not even at the eye level, they're just kind of closer to the floor. And yet he recognized that little soul, and he got down to his knee and ministered. And I feel like that is so important, that we don't forget the next gen in our journey of ministering and making disciples. So I think today we have some amazing guests that we can carry on this conversation. And who are those?
So I actually am so excited to introduce 2 of my friends to you. These are women who are pioneering and leading the way in next generation ministry. First, that will be coming on and sharing with us. Her name is Christel Duff. Christel is married to her husband, Cody. They've been married 11 years, which is absolutely amazing. They have 3 kids. And here's the really cool thing. She's originally from California, but she's now a elementary pastor, kids pastor in Wisconsin, actually at my home church in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Journey Church, which is so cool. She oversees 4 campuses with their children's ministry, which is absolutely great. And one thing that I love, and I've gotten to watch and witness firsthand, is that she loves working hand in hand with leading kids, their families, and young adults. Like she has a full spectrum of wanting to see the next gen, which is cool because she was actually a youth pastor before she was ever a kids pastor. So her heart and her expansion for youth and young adults and kids is massive. And so Christel is going to be joining us today. And another is a good friend of mine who I always have to revert to saying her married name because I've known her forever as Hannah Roan, but Hannah Abreu. She is a graduate of Central Bible College, which is where I went to school. She studied pastoral ministries and she's been ordained since 2016, which is amazing. She is the associate pastor at Calvary Christian Center in Louisville, Kentucky. She's been there for 7.5 years. And in addition to doing her associate pastor role, she also oversees their youth ministry. She's a part of the district youth ministry team. Wow. And she's been married to her husband for 3 years. She has a little boy named Asa, who is the stinking cutest. And so I'm excited for you guys to meet. Literally, these are not just women I look up to. They're women that I have the honor and privilege to call my friends. So Christel and Hannah, welcome to today's conversation.
Welcome. Wow. Pastor Christel and Pastor Hannah, man, you guys are excellent leaders. I mean, having 3 kids, I have 3 kids, that alone is hard, but to oversee multiple departments and doing that and you being married and just really ministering to not just one family, but multiple, this is not an easy task. This is super. You guys thank you for your obedience. Thank you for saying yes to this ministry in every season. That's so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just as I watch you all, like specifically as I watch the two of you lead in your capacities of ministry, I think you guys are really intentional to serve students in such a way that it isn't siloed, that you guys move beyond the box or the default of the way we've treated youth or children's or young adults ministry for years or decades. And so I would love to hear just from your perspective, because sometimes, again, I can silo myself. What is it that you guys love about this current generation of children and students?
Yeah, I would say that one of the things I love about this next generation is that they all want to work together. That is one thing that I'm seeing is that kids, youth, and young adults, like honestly, they love helping each other. Last fall, we actually, for an example of this, we had an event where it was a worship night with youth and kids. And our kids worship team got to be a part of our youth worship team. And it was incredible. Like, that's just a tangible, like, example. But like the youth were like worshiping with the kids and like doing motions like that. But it's like, that's one thing I love is that they see each other and it's not siloed. It's like, hey, I see you, I want to invest into you. Or like our young adults are serving in kids ministry and serving in young adults. And so that is one thing I love about all these generations is that they're all working together. I think another one would be is I see a big compassion heart in this generation that's coming up. They have such a compassion heart. They want that caring heart. That's just one thing that I'm seeing definitely in the kids ministry is that all of our kids are kind of walking in that. But those are just a few things I love about this generation. There's many, but yeah.
Love it.
Great. Yeah, I think that it's so often like people can get caught up on how they get annoyed by immaturity of students, of kids, of teenagers, especially as we grow into adulthood and we like get focused on family matters or current events or something. And so we kind of think like, oh, these are such trivial things that these students get so upset and dramatic about. But the thing that I love about that, particularly the last couple of years, especially after COVID, I don't know what made this specific shift, but they just don't care to put a mask on anymore. They're really about trying to just be who they are and be real, for better or worse. Just don't like, I can remember when I was in high school, when I was in middle school, especially, like I was careful about what I said or what I did because there were high schoolers in my youth group. And I wanted to make sure that I was like cool to the high schooler, that I wasn't the annoying middle schooler. And that is like so past. Like this generation just doesn't care about it that anymore. They don't care about how old you are, how young you are. They just want to be themselves. And I think that that poses challenges that we can maybe discuss later, but that also poses such genuine, authentic joy in knowing who people are and just being able to wrestle with that. And I love that aspect of it.
I love that. There's so many things that we can learn from this generation, right? Your next generations, like you're talking about being authentic is one thing, because I think our generation and older is like put on this church face, leader face, right? But I think this generation, next generation, is learning that they relate more to authentic leaders, even in their brokenness and vulnerability. That just serves them better and communicates better. That's just gospel embodied. Jesus was vulnerable, authentic in his weakness, right? And when he was tired, and when he was disappointed, he was disappointed. He didn't have any problem letting people know. So that's really cool. Authenticity, compassion, man, Pastor Christel, like, yes, we can totally learn that, especially online, don't we? Like, we can learn to have compassion and just having that relatability and just accepting people and being united. I think you said that, kids kind of seeing each other as like inclusive. So much that we can learn from that next gen. But at the same time, we also have challenges, don't we? Let's be authentic here, right? You're representing hundreds and thousands of voices that are ministering to the next gen, and they can say, yes, I hear you. So Pastor Hannah, why don't you talk about it? Like, what are some of the challenges that you see that's still a homework to you?
I think some of the challenges is because there's such a shift in identity, because there's such a shift in becoming who they are, in wanting to express who they are, and we're dealing with as a culture, not just in this next generation, but as in our world, with so many increase of anxiety and depression. And within that, there's this dichotomy of like wanting connection, wanting to do things as a team, wanting to, find out just like what Christel was talking about, that they want to be together. The struggle there is sometimes when we're trying to get people to be real, it can almost come across that we're celebrating things that are not of God because they're searching for their identity. And there's this tight line of like, okay, well, let me find out who you are so that we can minister and meet you exactly where we are and find genuine discipleship. But you can be accused by some people, a couple generations ahead of me, that because I want to be comfortable with somebody that identifies, honestly, as real as it can get, I have people in my area that identify as cats and identify as dogs. And the fact that I can sit with somebody that wants to purr and lap water out of a bowl and then talk to them about the love of God and how he had a plan and a purpose and what he created them for, that kind of intimidates a lot of people outside of this next generation, because they think, no, you just need to disassociate from that. And that has nothing to do with God. And so this challenge is, it's so different sometimes that it makes other people, Christian or non-Christian, it just makes people outside of that generation uncomfortable, nervous. And so it looks like sometimes that we celebrate these differences when in all actuality, being in the midst of it, we're just calling it out and trying to navigate it in the most loving way possible. And so I think the challenge is, how do we begin to understand the intricacies of this generation over the last few years without thinking that we're celebrating it at the same time?
You have to find the right balance too, right? To understand their world, you got to have a conversation with them, a conversation without judgment. But I think that one of the biggest problems is that we don't know. Like, these are foreign land, a foreign world, and just new identity. People identifying as cats and dogs. I mean, how do you have a conversation with that? Right? So maybe that uncertainty of the older generation, it makes it difficult to even sit down and have a conversation, let alone relate to them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I would add to that, that some of the things that I'm seeing is some social anxiety that we have been working through with a lot of our students and kids and stuff, because the last few years have been really rocky for our kids. And so a lot of them are dealing with anxiety, mental health, isolation, things like that. There's a lot of good about this generation, but like you said, there are some challenges with this generation that we are seeing, and definitely goes hand in hand with an identity, because after being isolated or after being anxiety and all of that, there's almost been like this fear over this generation of like the fear of the world, what's happening, what's going on. And so I think a lot of our kids are dealing with that. And now that we're somewhat getting to normal, which is great, but what is normal to them? Because they've just lost a few years. So they're trying to find that still. And just like Candace said, identity is a big one. Seeing our kids walk through that. Who are they? What do they believe right now? All those things are coming up, questions, all of that. And I think one thing that I've heard a lot of people say is like, oh, well, we didn't have to deal with that when we were your age, or you guys are facing more than what we did. And I think we all need to stop saying that. And I think because it almost puts like a doom and gloom on the next generation. Instead of saying, I'm not going to say that, I'm going to step in to what you're facing and I'm going to be with you in this, instead of saying, oh, well, like the older generations, oh, well, we didn't have to face what you guys are facing. And so like, hey, we're praying for you. But hey, look, we're going to step into this with you, instead of them keep hearing that. And I heard a person say that, and I was like, wow, that's challenging, But yeah, there's a lot of good, but there are definitely some challenges reaching this generation for sure.
Those are really good, important points that you're talking about, because America, there's a study out there talking about America is no longer a Christian nation. We may have the percentage-wise, we are Christians, but practicing Christians is less than 50. But the number that is vastly increasing is the number of nuns, non-affiliated or non-religious. That's difficult, right? That's really challenging. And so we're almost going to post-Christian era where people haven't even heard about the word Bible or Jesus. In a way, it's like a first century, going back to the first century Christian, reaching out to Gentiles. In a way, it's good news, fresh start, but it's bad because that means we lost touch with this generation, with the next generation. A lot to think about.
Yeah. And Christel, I love how you you guys are both coming to that place of like identity. And, I think sometimes like from even just as I get more and more removed from being like, I'll be 30, like in just a few weeks. Wow. But then not like serving in a youth ministry context, it's easy for me to start saying things like, oh, like, I can't believe that kids are dealing with this, or I can't believe that they would identify that way, or why would they drink from a bowl that way? Or, oh gosh, I never had to deal with that when I was in middle school. Praise God. Like we can like put a lot of stigmas on it just by the words that we use. And even just the attitude in which we do this. And unfortunately, and this is what I'm really like trying to grapple with myself. And so I was like, why not bring a conversation up about it? But okay, how do I become personally responsible in serving this generation? Right. Like, I don't want to leave that responsibility solely up to the two of you. You two are more than capable. You two are pioneers, but that whole responsibility of serving children, family, and their children, youth, and their families is not your sole responsibility. It's my responsibility too. So I would love to hear from you. And Christel, you can share first, how do we as ministers in a variety of roles, so whether we're lead pastors, associate pastors, how can we be more intentional with kids, youth, and their families?
Yeah, the number one word that comes to my mind is just being relational. So this generation doesn't want just a high bye. Like, they will know if you're caring and when you're not caring. And so I think being intentional is really key for us as leaders, as us as pastors, for your volunteers, all of that, people in the church, being intentional. They will know it when you're not. And I think another piece to all this is parents. If you are doing ministry without reaching the parents, you have one of your hands tied behind your back. And you have to have parent involvement, reaching the parents, because you can minister to them on a Wednesday or a Sunday, but you on average get 42 hours a year with these kids. Once you break that down, you only get that many hours. And so, yes, we can make it excellent. Yes, we can try to do everything we possibly can. But what do they go home to? They go home to mom and dad. They go home to grandma, whoever they live with. And that is the person that's giving them the influence the most, is at the home. So if we can reach the home, that is a win in Next Gen ministry. And so that's where we need to start, is ministering to parents. And one of the practical ways that we do that here is my husband and I do Parent Connect nights. And it's more than just event, right? We can throw an event together, but actually creating a ministry for parents. And so we bring all the parents together on a Wednesday, so they can all go drop their kids off, and we just minister to parents and resource them and let them know that hey, we're with you in this. So that is a way that we can come together and help this next generation, is with being more intentional, I would say, and partnering with parents. Absolutely.
That's good. Putting that responsibility back to where it's supposed to be. That's cool.
Yeah. Starts at home.
Yeah.
I have a couple of thoughts on extending reaching out to the parents, but also still bridging that gap with the parents, and then in the holistic approach to ministry within the local church. And so, just like we initially started this conversation when Anna said, how do we get outside of the silo of next gen ministry and making it seem so independent? We're seeing a lot of people that I've studied the last few years on this breakdown of the church within this generation, and what it has done historically. When I was in high school 15 years ago, they were telling me as a senior, there's an 80% chance in 12 months you're not even going to be in church anymore. They were telling me that 15 years ago. And so if that was true 15 years ago, how much more it could be true today. But I have to ask, and I've done research on, is like, well, what causes that breakdown? And I think that in all of its efforts, the way that the church has done, trying to break down kids ministry and break down youth ministry and break down young adult ministry so that we can effectively disciple and administer the word on a learning level that they understand, it's kind of had an unintentional side effect of they only view their faith and religion within that context.
Right.
So when there is not an example of a whole life approach to a relationship with God, then there's fractures as they go through these seasons, as they learn how to be an individual coming into adulthood, how they learn how to be a wife or a husband, how they learn how to be in the workforce. And they never had examples about how to live their faith in those contexts. So one of the things that I think that we could do in hand with partnering with the parents is, as people in roles of being the associate pastor or being a young adults pastor or being any type of ministry outside of kids pastor or youth pastor, is being intentional about developing relationships the way that Christel was talking, but showing what that relationship with God looks like in your context. That they have like an actual clear example of how they would be able to walk out that relationship when they're no longer in high school, or when they're no longer like having this rigid schedule of, I can go to FCA before school and people know I'm a Christian. And, what that looks like is how do I have a relationship with God when I have 3 kids crawling around me and I'm trying to be a good wife and I'm trying to make dinner at the same time. And I felt like I have no time to just like go and share the gospel with somebody because I'm so consumed in my world. How do you live out the gospel when it looks like that? And I think when we begin to break down the segregations of our ministries and we begin to show kids that on a Sunday morning, their parents are also worshiping, and they don't just see worship in their context with the hyper music and the hand motions. We don't have hand motions on Sunday morning that are taught on how to dance. I think when they can see that there is a relationship with God outside of that specific level, then they begin to see what the relationship with God looks like for the rest of their life, and how that can change. And so we are intentional. At least once a month, we invite our kids into our main service, and our kids team brings them in, and they have a section that they sit in, and they intentionally worship with us on Sunday mornings, so that we can try to be somewhat influential in showing what life with God can look like outside of their Sunday morning kids' perspective. And I think that can go across any type of ministry when you are intentional about opening up your relationship with God to the next generation.
That is so good. So inviting parents and caregivers to the life of the next gen, but also inviting the next gen to the life of the adult Christians, mature Christians, so that they're seamless. It's both and. So that's really cool because we're talking about no siloed ministry.
Yeah.
This is the whole body of Christ. So that's good. So here's my final question. In supporting and leading the Next Gen ministries, maybe your final thoughts. What could we do both for ministers, ministry leaders, volunteers, or even just parents, caregivers that are supporting this Next Gen? What are some of your final thoughts, the gold nuggets that we must walk away with? Hannah, and then we'll go to Christel.
Yeah, so there are two things that especially stand out to me. The first is being like actually spiritually aware. I think sometimes, especially like people that have been in the church their whole life, or people that are like lay leaders in the church, they kind of forget like the actual spiritual battle that happens, and how much there is just such a supernatural presence in this generation. They're interested in the supernatural. It's like publicly celebrated now. Like an event that we have in my city this week is like an actual festival and a ball inviting all witches and warlocks to come and celebrate and be together and do festivities together. And so I think that the first thing is to actually pray big spiritual prayers, fighting for the souls of this generation, because they're so in tune with supernatural, but they're not necessarily in tune with the supernatural of God and the things of God. And then the second thing, in the most pragmatic sense, is sometimes as youth ministries and kids ministries, we're kind of left to our own devices and feel like we're pushed to the side just because of, oh, well, those are just kids or those are just students. But the best way that you could probably help our ministries is to be willing to serve at events that we do or at retreats. Sometimes it can be really hard to find leaders or to find servers to help prep with the food, or to be counselors for camp or things like that. And we need to lean on people that are still spiritually wise to help minister to those kids in those moments when there's God moving in the altars. So I would say the second way to help in those times is to actually volunteer and serve at events that your leaders that are involved in kids and student ministries would be putting on.
Wow, Hannah, thank you for that reminder that yes, this is such a bigger battle than what we can even like see with our own physical eyes. And to be reminded that we do need to steep our ministries in the way that we serve youth with prayer. So with that being said, Christel, what are your nuggets? Like, okay, if you can walk away with anything, this would be it.
Yeah, I would just say, speaking life over the next generation, the words that you say are significant. And I think coming alongside of the next generation. So if you're a pastor in another department on staff, like come alongside your next gen team and be like, hey, how can I help you? How can I support you? Hey, I want to come in on a youth service. Hey, I want to invite you into these things. Invite your lead pastor to some of your events, right? So that he can get eyes on what you're doing and that he can say, wow, like this matters, right? What we do matters. Instead of saying, oh, we have to do this, we need to have the attitude of saying we get to do this.
Right.
And so I think that's some of the things that I would say. Keep praying, just like Hannah was saying, prayer is huge for this generation as they are coming up. But I love this generation. They are going to do incredible things. And so really excited to see that.
That's really good. Christel, I think it's a really good point at inviting the senior pastor to what's happening for the rest of the body of Christ, because he or she can always know that they can get this fingerprint of what's happening, and then they can serve better, because it is really true that senior pastors can get siloed. Not intentionally, but because they're so stretched thin into many directions. So inviting senior pastors and into the kids ministry, youth ministries, even nursery. Oh my goodness, wouldn't that be so fun to have senior pastors and volunteer for a weekend? That would be awesome. And that's just how we model. We don't just preach about investing in the next generation, but we embody what we preach. So thank you for that reminder. Well, Pastor Hannah, Pastor Christel, you guys are movers and shakers. Anna, thank you. Excellent interviewees, practitioners. So we love you guys and appreciate you. Thank you for your time. Well, Anna, what's your biggest takeaway from our conversation today?
Honestly, I'm walking away actually feeling like really encouraged and inspired in my parenting. Like I'm like, okay, I want to be all the more intentional to keep exposing my son to a long view of faith, not just like a short view of one. And so that's one thing I'm really encouraged about, but also coming alongside of my pastors and my friends that are in this area of ministry, coming alongside of them, asking them like, who are people that you need mentoring for? Like, who are maybe some young women that I can come alongside of and that you'd like for me to build relationship with?
That's really good. I just recently transitioned from being a senior pastor to a college director, right? And so this is a whole new different ministry context, but I'm missing this church ministry. So I've been like jokingly said to people, like, you know what, one day when I'm not a lead pastor, I'm going to volunteer in a nursery, but that might be the case for me, so going back to investing in the very first next gen, I'm looking forward to that. Well, friends, thank you so much for joining this conversation. If you are youth ministers, ministry volunteers and leaders, parents, caregivers, we are here for you. We support you. We're in this together. And thank you for believing in the next generation and inviting them to your personal life and investing in them. Well, thank you, Anna. We'll see you back, and follow us on our social media at AG Women Ministers. Until next time, God bless you.